All right, we're here to talk about the Computer Science Education Grant that is being administered by OSPI, and Washington STEM is under a pending, still being developed contract to help initiate this and to assist in the review process. And today we're going to give you a quick overview of the opportunity. And we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. In the meantime, we do have a staff here in the room tracking any comments that you make. If you want to put some questions in the queue, you can do that now. We're going to review those as they come in, and if we think it's timely, we'll pause and expand. And if we don't think it's timely to pause and expand, as the questions come in, we'll come back around to those at the end of the overview of the grant opportunity. So with no further ado, the background here is that the state has provided $1 million for fiscal year 2015-16 and another $1 million for 16-17 to get computer science education up and running, or really to build on the bits and pieces that exist in the field at present. We think this is a great opportunity to really put a stake in the ground and to build some enthusiasm. As you all have invariably discovered, there is a private match component, so we'll be talking about that piece as well. So not only is it $1 million from the state coffers this year, but it's one plus for every dollar we can spend a match from a private source. The funds are designed to support training and credentialing of teachers, upgrading technology as needed, and to engage students, in particular to serve students from underrepresented groups, to engage them in computer science education. Pretty broad parameters, lots of flexibility in terms of how we can use these resources. Okay, good. So just a little background here. For those of you who are frantically writing notes, I'm going to invite you to sit back and take notes selectively. I have put on the screen in front of you now the web page that has much of what we're going to be talking about. And rather than tell you a URL, of course you can copy that down. If you just search in your browser Computer Science Grants OSPI, you'll come to the page that captures what I'm going to say and much more. In particular, I'll point your attention to the Computer Science Education Grant RFP and Guidelines. That is there for you to peruse. So we have two different phases to talk about. The first phase is, we'll call it the lightning round. It's money that is in hand to be spent on activities between now and June 30th. That gives just a couple months of actual funded activity, or a few months of funded activity, so we have to be creative and flexible the way we think about it. And then at this time, folks can also apply for Phase 2. So you can apply for Phase 1, or you can apply for Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 begins once the words are made and ends June 30th of 2016, and Phase 2 begins July 1 of 2016 and ends June 30th, 2017. So we're talking today about the first solicitation, and in that solicitation you can apply for either 1 or 1 and 2. And we're just giving you a little preview that later this spring we'll have a second solicitation open that you can apply for Phase 2 resources. So as you know, in Washington State, we don't currently have K12 computer science learning standards. Those are actually under development, and it's an exciting time to be doing that in the state. We're working with OSPI on that project currently, and so in the near future, we'll have K12 standards that we can all really focus on and build from. But because we don't have those now, we're going to have to be creative. And again, in guidelines and support materials that I referred to earlier, there are links to several sets of standards that we find appealing and that we think have rigor and enduring quality, and encourage you to use those. And I'm putting this up front because we have, in the process of engaging with stakeholders about computer science education, we often hear questions about, well, does X count as computer science? Is it coding? Well, yes, it's coding. Is it robotics? Well, it depends. Are the robots being used as a mechanism for helping students develop knowledge, skills, and dispositions with respect to computer programming? Often they are, so that would be the answer. I hope that you'll be mindful of this constraint because it'll be very important for us as we look at applications that the outcomes for students are very clear. Now, a question that comes up, and I know there are several messages in my inbox from today even, is what about the private sources? We need to be very rigorous about this in that we need to determine that matching sources are private. But we need to be very flexible about this because the provision of private resources is a complicated and time-consuming task, and it can play a limiting factor for smaller districts and districts that don't have large organizational partners who can easily kick in. So private sources can include gifts, cash or in-kind, grants, endowments. But the critical word here is private. They can't be public dollars. They can't be a tax-based fund. They can't be the time and resources of a local school system. They can't be a state award in another category. They have to be private. Now, it's important also to think about that private in a broad way. It doesn't mean that starting today you need to go out and find a fund, someone who will give you funds one-to-one for the proposal you're putting in. It could be that you're sitting on a 3-year award, and then in your last year of an award that's devoted to computer science education, you could call that a match. Those resources that are in hand are going to be used in computer science as long as they're tied to the activities you're proposing to do in relation to computer science education. So think about that creatively and use your own creativity to identify those private resources that are in hand. Be sure to count those. Those of you who do not have a full match in hand at the time of your proposal, we still want to see your project. We're very interested in knowing what's going on, and that serves a number of purposes. One of which is there is a possibility that we will be able to find a private match to cap off projects. Now, given the time frame and the limitations on this particular opportunity, we're making no promises, but we want to know. That's one of the reasons we want to know. Another reason we want to know is that we think this is the very tip of the iceberg in computer science education in Washington. As many of you probably saw, just yesterday, last week, President Obama made an announcement about his commitments and his enthusiasm. We've seen certain corporate partners, industry partners step up and make to computer science education, and we think there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities that lie ahead. So if we know and we can start to accumulate those proposals, we can use those to make the case to funders, to the state, to others that there's a lot of potential and interest in this area. So please send your proposals, knowing that even if you don't have your private match in hand, they serve a purpose. And there is an outside chance that even in this early phase 1, there will be matching opportunities that we can help you identify. We would do that after the proposals go in, though. So you don't need to write us and ask for a match at this point. The timeline is not adequate for that kind of activity at this time. And we are tracking questions. I see a lot of them coming in, and my colleagues here are making notes. So know that we're tracking that, and we will address those in a few minutes once we get to the slides. So applicant eligibility, again, there's a pretty broad berth here. Obviously, the primary target here is K12 schools and school systems, which includes skill centers and ESDs. Nonprofits in partnership with schools can also apply. So if you have a partner who's been doing professional development in computer science education or curriculum development, and you want to go in with them, we encourage that application. Institutions of higher education, obviously there's a strand on teacher education, and we think they would be logical partners in that space, as would ESDs. So please think broadly about your partnership. One limitation to put on the table here is that while a single organization can be involved in multiple applications, only one application, each organization is able to apply as a lead on one application. So I might be the lead on a single application, and I might partner with another organization as a collaborator, but that second application would go in through the other organization. They would be the lead applicant. So competitive priorities. As I've said, I'm going to skip to the second bullet first. Projects that have a private match in hand are going to get our priority review. That's very important at this time. While we would love for all folks to be able to participate, we just have to be pragmatic in that sense. The overarching goal of this project is to serve underserved communities and students who haven't had exposure to computer science. So we are balancing that principle with the reality that the language in the legislative proviso requires a one-to-one match. So we have to prioritize getting these monies spent, and the way we're going to target those monies is to make sure that they're going to schools and systems that are serving students from underserved groups disproportionately. For phase one projects, that means we're going to be looking at implementation-ready projects. So it's largely folks who are either doing something that's fairly discrete and will get them into computer science, or folks who have a well-established program that they're building on in a way that is very clear. And we think it's important as you make your case in the proposal that you illustrate how what you're doing builds on what has happened in the past in computer science education in your district or your organization. In phase two, there's an additional competitive priority to integrate computer science into other subject matter areas and other aspects of students' educational experience. We think this is important for the long-term health of computer science education. While we need classes devoted to learning computer science, qua computer science, the world is increasingly integrated, and we want to create opportunities that are of interest to a broad diversity of students. So exploring computer science in relation to other subject matter areas will be critical for those reasons. Yeah. All right. And then here we get to the timeline. Again, I'll acknowledge this is an extremely aggressive timeline, and I can't begin to explain to you why it is the way it is. We enter this project as a partner to OSPI to help them, and these are the facts on the ground as we've entered. So I don't have any particular way to shape this at this point or a way to explain it. It is what it is. So the applications opened on January 27th, and they will close very quickly on February 8th. Many people end up writing grants at the last minute anyway, so some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with such tight timelines. Again, apologies, but that is the way it is. The upside of that is by late February, February 29th, we'll have grants announced, and you can begin working immediately upon receiving your award. On June 30th, the activities need to be completed. So funding out the door, activities executed, and paid for by June 30th. After that, the monies disappear. So we need to make sure that folks are planning activities that are actually executable between now and June 30th, or between February 29th and June 30th. As I mentioned previously, there is the second phase, and those of you who are applying right now can be applying for phase one and phase two. Phase two activities need to be executed by June 30th, 2017. So that's an additional year. And as mentioned previously, we will have another RFP in spring for the second phase only. So for activities to begin July 1 and would be concluded by June 30th. And I'll just go to this slide on supporting resources to highlight a couple of things. Again, all of these links and resources I'm pointing to can be found on the OSPI Computer Science Grant page that I flashed on the screen at the beginning of this overview. The RFP and guidelines document is critical. I think you should read every word many times as you prepare to write a proposal. That'll only save you time in the long run. And it will include most of the content from this presentation, much of it elaborated. It includes links to computer science learning standards, and there are a number of good documents. We hope you'll take a look at those as you prepare your proposal. It also includes a scoring rubric, which will help you, again, get focused on the kinds of things that you'll be evaluated on. The iGrants package itself, this is the actual document you'll go to fill out the proposal, is available from the link on this slide, as well as on the computer science page at OSPI. There's also a link to help, so as needed, you can go and get help from on iGrants there. Final slide here is just contact information. The review itself will be conducted here at Washington STEM. We have recruited a number of folks from the field to participate in that, and we will manage that process. So questions pertaining to the substance of your proposals and to the review process can come to us. We will, of course, communicate with our partners at OSPI, Ellen Ebert and Clarence Dancer. Their contact listed here. There are certain questions that would be most appropriate to go to them, and we'll help you sort through those as those come up. But immediately it comes to mind the iGrants process itself. That is something that resides at OSPI and that we don't have any direct influence over. So the questions about that, that's one category you would definitely want to take to OSPI. So I'm going to pause and ask my colleagues here who have been tracking questions to read a question and to help me sift through the answers.
Okay, well, this is Gilda Wheeler from Washington STEM, and one thing I would say is there's several questions around the iGrants form. I would suggest that you contact folks at OSPI in iGrants. There's that help line there, a question around, say, the CEDARS contact. That really doesn't apply to nonprofits, so there's a few kind of anomalies in that. But anything having to do with the actual iGrants form, I would contact folks at iGrants, at OSPI through the iGrants.
So iGrants questions to iGrants help, and to, I think you should look at help first, but then also I'm sure both Ellen and CJ Clarence would be available to help if the help function of iGrants is not, doesn't serve your needs.
There was a question around if people could apply for both phase 2 now and phase 2 again when the next round comes through.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. I'll also note that if you are unsuccessful at phase 1 or a phase 1, phase 2 proposal, we would like to keep those proposals in hand. Those that are meritorious, that were, for example, lacking a match, may become more doable as we are out talking to folks in the community about this opportunity who may have resources to provide the match. So apply early, apply often, and know that your application can be considered downstream as well as when it is initially reviewed.
There was another question around how we're measuring the percentage or amount of underrepresented students or students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And I mean, I would say we don't have a specific cutoff point, just there's a space in the grant application for you to provide that information.
So I mean, I think you should refer to the data that you track internally. If you're applying from a school system, for example, you certainly have numbers on free and reduced meals. That's always a good measure to help people understand the context you're working on. Of course, there are lots of other features that you can describe, so you'll need to think about that. And just remember, you're going to be writing this proposal to you fellow educators. So what are the aspects of diversity that are important that make your community a rich and interesting environment and that make the challenges of computer science unique. That's sort of a principle you should use as you think about that challenge.
There were also several questions about the match, and I think several of them were actually answered in the presentation. But I would just say that it clearly has to be from a private source. So if it's from a district or from an ESD that's publicly funded, then it wouldn't count. If ESD has a private source donation, which often they get, then that could count. So I just would be careful about making sure that you're explaining where that match is coming from and that it's a private source.
We have a question about accounting for the match. The question is whether the match needs to be one-to-one across budget categories, and the answer is no. You could have a match that comes in the form of in-kind services. Say you're working with a local firm that has computer scientists or engineers to be of assistance in professional development or as mentors to students, and you might use that as a match for resources devoted to acquiring equipment, and that would be fine. Those don't need to match. They need to add up, but they don't need to match across categories.
There was another question about where to put something like teacher stipends in the budget, because there wasn't a line item for that. I believe there's other miscellaneous category in there. If not, then I would put it where you think it best fits and explain it in the budget narrative what that is. That might have been an oversight that there wasn't a category for that. But just make sure that you explain it in the narrative and that you put it somewhere in the budget.
The answer to that question. We're reviewing the questions now. Give us a second.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, the budget. If you're applying, this is a question around the budget and where you put phase 1 and phase 2 funds. If you're applying for just phase 1, obviously just listing phase 1. If you're doing a combined phase 1 and 2, then it's still one budget, and you're combining all of the different categories for both phase 1 and 2. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. The question about whether the resources can be used for after-school opportunities, the answer is yes. A community college, would a community college be considered a private match? We need a little more specificity there. It really depends on what the resource is. If a community college is working under a private grant, then yes. If the community college is providing in-kind services, I think those would be considered public. And I can only read the tea leaves on this. I think the intent of the legislator by indicating private was to encourage broader participation in this project. So we need to be focused on the word private in a sense.
There's a question around what's capital outlay. That would be equipment. That's where equipment would fall. That would be an example of that. That's a hard one to answer. It is allowed, but I don't know the percentage.
The indirect is allowed. In fact, it's specified at a certain level in the solicitation. We don't have that number in front of us, but I see that question is from Karen Manuel. So Karen, if you don't see that in the materials, why don't you send me a note, and we'll add that both in a response to you and to a Q&A document, which we'll post after this discussion. Let's see. Oh, there we go. We got an answer to that question already from Paul LaGrange. Thanks, Paul. It's 5.62%. Federal grants do not count as a private match. Federal dollars are public dollars. So there's another question that came in. I think we've kind of gone through all the questions that are up there, but I'm going to hang out in the line here for a few more minutes and see what else may come in.
We will do a more thorough review of questions as well, and there'll be a FAQ posted shortly. So if we didn't capture your nuanced question, hopefully it will be covered in the FAQ.
The question about the match going back to July 2015, I think it's possible. The match needs to be related to computer science education and private, and it needs to be present time. It can't be past, right? So an investment that was made and expended, or equipment that was purchased and used, wouldn't count. But I think a recent acquisition of equipment from a private source would certainly count. A grant that is not yet fully expended, you could count the unexpended portion as part of your match. Eric is asking me to restate the indirect rate, and I'm taking this from the question stream, and we'll put this again in the document when we follow up. But what we're reading here is it's 5.6.
Should verify that.
We'll verify that. It'll be in the Q&A document. Okay. So we're hanging on for additional questions. And I'll scan back through to see if there are others that we can answer that we may have missed. Let's see. I have a question from Wes Allen. If we put in an application to work with TEALS, which is a private computer science education activity that does PD and curriculum, if we put in an application with TEALS and get accepted as a partner, could that be counted as our in-kind match funding? Yes. The aspects of TEALS that are contributed in kind and of a private source, which would be all of them from TEALS, would count as your match or towards your match. Eric Ferguson is asking, can a private grant from last semester count? I mean, probably. It kind of depends on what the grant is, Eric. So if the work is ongoing, and if you think the resources are still in play and in support of your computer science activity, of the activities you've proposed, the answer is yes. Kathleen is asking, what is a Frontiers grant as mentioned in the RFP? Honestly, I found the language a little strange. It came from the proviso, and Frontiers grants was really focused on introducing students to computer science education. I don't find it particularly useful, though it does do a bit of underscoring the need to focus on serving students in communities that have not gotten sufficient, adequate exposure and experience in computer science education. So the diversity goal of the project. But I don't think it really relates anything about the activities that you can invest in as different from the other two categories that the proviso calls out. So hanging on here, I think we're sort of at the let's see. There are training and curriculum resources available that are sponsored by businesses. Would that count? How do you quantify? That's from Mary Beth Tack. Mary Beth, the answer is yes. If you have materials in hand that are of a private nature, they've come from a private funding source, such as a business, those are valid. How do you count for those? That's a little more complicated. You certainly can assign a dollar value to materials that have been provided to you, and you can quantify in kind the time that people provide based on prevailing wages. So if you have a curriculum specialist that would be doing a job otherwise, you can use a curriculum specialist wage to account for the contributed time of a partner organization. And I'm getting a question from Susan Christensen. Is Code, I think you mean the organization K12, considered a private source? Yes, they are a private, nonprofit organization. Their funding is private, not from a public entity like a school system or government agency. So that would be a private matching source. Getting a question from Namisha Roy. For an organization providing in-kind matching, we need info in the budget as well as a letter of support. Namisha, the application has to provide some accounting for the in-kind. So you work at K12, and you would need to help your partner who's applying account for the contributed value of your match. So you would need to provide that information, but not independent. You could just integrate that into the main proposal, and the letter of support, of course, would be an additional thing, which is up to you. You don't have to submit the letter. I'm getting a question from Steve Shumsky about working in a rural, high-poverty area and with no private businesses. What are your suggestions for finding private funds? Well, Steve, I hope you will send your proposal in, and I hope that you will be creative with some of the suggestions that we gave earlier of accounting for things that you have in hand, including volunteer time from folks in the community, which you can certainly account for. And we, in phase 2, will play a much more active role in helping to identify funding to suit the cases like yours. Another question about in-kind, would a private college or university, would their facilities use count? Yes, I think that would count. A private institution providing a service or a facility would certainly be a private match. We got a little bit of a rah-rah. We got Namisha saying she's looking forward to supporting her district partners, which is awesome. Thank you, Namisha. Okay. And a couple thank yous. I certainly appreciate that. A little strange talking to an empty room full of people who you know are thinking hard thoughts, can't really get a full sense of. I'm going to look around this room, which is not fully empty. I apologize. Are there other things to add, colleagues? Questions that you have?
No.
Okay. Folks, thank you for joining this webinar. You have our contact information, and we're eager to be helpful. We want to see your proposal. Please bring us good proposals. As I said earlier, we will consider them seriously, and we will also use them for the broader purpose of making the case that there's capacity and interest to do more for our kids vis-a-vis computer science education in Washington. So we look forward to seeing your questions and your proposals, and thanks again for your time. Bye.